The signal came without warning. It was a small, broken sound drifting through deep space, weaker than a whisper. At first, no one noticed it. It flickered for a few seconds, vanished, then came again after a long pause. The machines that guarded the edge of alien territory caught it, logged it, and almost erased it, until one curious technician slowed it down and realized it was repeating something. The pattern wasn't random. It was trying to say something, though the words were buried under static and age. He showed it to his supervisor, who laughed it off. "Old echoes," he said. "Space is full of them." But that strange signal kept returning every few hours, each time a little stronger, as if someone or something was trying harder to be heard. The data was eventually passed to the Central Communication Lab, where experts cleaned it up and discovered coordinates hidden inside the noise. Those coordinates pointed to a place no one dared to visit anymore. The aliens called it Deathworld 37E. Long ago, it had been the heart of human power, a world of storms, metals, and endless conflict. The last known battle of the human empire had ended there. Since then, the planet had been left untouched, wrapped in violent weather and superstition. Travelers said even machines refused to work near it. Ships that came close often returned damaged or didn't return at all. For generations, everyone believed the Deathworlders, the humans, had wiped themselves out. They were gone, erased from history except for the ruins they left behind. Some said it was better that way. Others secretly admired them, though they would never admit it aloud. Humanity had always been different, too brave, too stubborn, too unpredictable. A race that turned every challenge into survival training. Even their enemies whispered that humans were the only species that could turn a disaster into a new beginning. So when the signal was traced back to their home system, panic quietly spread. Scientists worked around the clock to study it, but governments told the public nothing. They didn't want chaos. A small team of explorers was sent to check the source. Their ship slipped into the dark without broadcasting its name. Days passed. Then weeks. No messages came back. The ship had vanished, and so had everyone on it. The Council of Alien Worlds held secret meetings. They argued whether to send more ships or simply pretend the signal didn't exist. Some leaders believed it was a trap, a leftover human weapon designed to lure the curious. Others thought it might be a malfunctioning satellite repeating a ghost transmission. The debate grew heated. Fear sat quietly in the corners of every room. None of them wanted to admit the truth they all suspected. If the signal was real, it meant the Deathworlders were still alive. One historian dared to say it out loud during a council session. His voice trembled as he spoke. He reminded them that humans had once ruled entire sectors, not through sheer power, but through something stranger, their will to survive no matter the odds. He told them how humans had thrived on planets no one else could live on, where air burned the lungs and storms ripped the ground apart. To humans, every world was just another challenge to overcome. That was why the galaxy called them Deathworlders. They came from a planet that tried to kill them every day, and somehow they made it home. When the historian finished, the room fell silent. No one laughed. Everyone remembered stories their ancestors told, how humans had fought wars that should have been impossible to win, how they had vanished without leaving a trace. No one wanted them to return, not because of hate, but because of what their return would mean. It would mean the balance of the galaxy could change again. Meanwhile, the signal continued to pulse, steady and patient, as if it knew someone was listening. The longer it played, the clearer it became. It was no longer just noise. Hidden deep inside the waves was a faint mechanical voice, broken but still speaking. Translators tried to restore it, and after weeks of work, a single phrase emerged. System 9A awake. Protocol Armada active. That message froze the entire research department. No one understood what it meant, but the word Armada made every leader's blood run cold. It sounded military, organized, alive. Orders were given to erase all data and destroy the relay that had received it. But it was too late. The signal had already bounced across several networks, copied, analyzed, and passed along to others who were just as curious. Soon the story leaked to civilians. Traders whispered about it in spaceports, and miners swapped rumors over cheap drinks. They said the humans were coming back. They said the signal was their war cry. Some even claimed to have seen lights moving near the old Terran border, fleets of ships without identification codes. Fear grew into superstition. Even the boldest pilots avoided the dark zones of space where the signal had come from. Far away, in the quiet of the galaxy's rim, the signal continued its lonely song. No one could see what was really happening in the silence beyond. In the dust of forgotten planets, ancient machines stirred. Lights blinked for the first time in centuries. Frozen systems hummed with life as long-sleeping circuits reconnected. The message that started as a whisper had reached something vast, something that remembered. Deep below the storms of Deathworld 37E, a single satellite received the final echo of the signal. Its sensors glowed weakly, scanning the sky. The old human code inside it began to unfold like a locked memory waking from a dream. Data filled the air, connecting to hidden relays buried under rock and metal. Slowly, the planet that everyone thought was dead began to breathe again. In distant observation stations, strange readings appeared on screens. Energy levels spiked. Unknown frequencies filled the spectrum. The scientists didn't understand it, but their instruments were sure of one thing. Something enormous was awakening. No one knew it yet, but the first step had already been taken. The whisper from deep space wasn't just a random echo. It was a call. Somewhere across the endless dark, the Deathworlders had heard it, and soon, the galaxy would remember why they were feared, respected, and never forgotten. The technician who had first noticed the signal sat alone in the monitoring room, watching the blinking lights fade. He didn't know his small discovery had already changed history. He only knew that silence had returned. Yet in that silence, he could almost feel the hum of something ancient, turning its gaze back toward the stars, something that had been sleeping for far too long. For many years, the galaxy had spoken about Earth as a legend, something between a warning and a bedtime story. Most species didn't even use its name anymore. They called it the Deathworld, a place too wild, too dangerous, too unpredictable for any sane being to survive. The older generation remembered hearing how humans used to live there, walking under burning skies and freezing oceans, building cities in storms that would destroy any other species' machines. Over time, people stopped believing humans were real. They became myth, a story told by old space travelers who claimed to have seen their ruins or fought them in ancient wars. Some said humans had burned themselves out. Others said they had fled beyond known space. No one really knew. The galaxy moved on. New civilizations rose, old ones fell, and the stars forgot the sound of human voices. Until the signal. It didn't take long for whispers to spread. Merchants, pilots, and even pirates began to trade stories of strange light flashes near the Terran border. Some said the old human stations were coming back online. Others claimed to have seen metal fragments moving in perfect formation, like fleets testing their engines after a long sleep. The leaders of the galaxy didn't want to believe it, but deep inside they feared it might be true. In a council meeting held on the floating city of Dalar Prime, leaders from 15 species sat together. The tension was heavy enough to silence even the usual political arguments. Reports from border stations were read one after another, strange transmissions, missing ships, and electrical storms forming around a lifeless planet that shouldn't even have an atmosphere anymore. The scientists offered theories. Maybe it was a natural phenomenon. Maybe it was pirates using old technology. But no one could explain why the signal matched an ancient Terran frequency that had been inactive for over 200 years. Every time someone tried to decode it, they ended up with fragments of human language and one repeating message: Armada Protocol active. The words alone were enough to haunt anyone who knew history. The human armada had once been the largest fleet in known space, unstoppable in battle and unpredictable in peace. They were known not only for their power, but for their sheer will. When their ships fell, their survivors fought on foot. When their worlds burned, they built new ones out of the ashes. No one understood how they kept winning against impossible odds. For other civilizations, war was a tragedy. For humans, it was survival. The more the Alien Council argued, the clearer it became that no one was brave enough to send another ship to investigate. The last team that had gone near Deathworld 37E had vanished without a trace. Even their black box data couldn't be recovered. It was as if space itself had swallowed them. A few brave pilots volunteered to go. They weren't soldiers, just explorers driven by curiosity. They believed the rumors were just exaggerations, that the old tales of Deathworlders were nothing more than old space legends. They promised they'd return with proof that the signal was harmless. They never came back either. After that, silence settled in again. Governments tried to block all communication about the signal, labeling it as misinformation. Yet every day more ships reported strange readings. In some sectors, old human satellites suddenly began transmitting again, showing coordinates no one had seen in centuries. On one mining colony, a worker found an ancient metal plaque buried in the dust. It had a symbol carved into it, a simple circle crossed by 3 lines. The translation software couldn't identify it, but one old historian recognized it instantly. It was the emblem of the Terran Exploration Corps. The miners thought it was fake, just an old artifact someone planted, but when they lifted it from the ground, their scanners picked up an underground pulse, something mechanical still active deep below the surface. The discovery caused panic. The colony was evacuated within hours. Military ships surrounded the planet, and then the transmissions began again, this time stronger than before. It wasn't just one beacon anymore. Across multiple systems, ancient Terran satellites came alive like glowing eyes opening after a long sleep. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy could feel something moving beneath the quiet. People began to talk in fear. They said the Deathworlders were coming back to reclaim what was once theirs. Others said they never really left, that they'd been sleeping, waiting for a signal to awaken them. Some believed the signal wasn't from humans at all, but from their machines, AI systems still carrying out orders long after their creators had vanished. No one could be sure which story was true. Meanwhile, traders and travelers noticed something strange. When they passed near certain old Terran ruins, their systems would malfunction. Radios would crackle with human voices whispering broken words. Some heard laughter. Others heard what sounded like an old distress call. One pilot swore that his navigation system displayed a human face for a split second before shutting down completely. He quit flying after that. As fear spread, a few alien scholars tried to understand why the idea of humans scared everyone so deeply. It wasn't just their strength or technology. It was something harder to define, their spirit. Humans had a way of changing everything around them. Even when they lost, they forced the galaxy to evolve. They had left their mark not just in history, but in the DNA of civilization itself. Every species alive had learned something from them, even if they pretended to forget. Now, with the signal echoing louder each week, no one could keep pretending. Something was happening, something huge. The power readings around Deathworld 37E were off the charts. Magnetic storms spun across its sky like living things, and new structures seemed to be rising from under its surface. Satellites recorded shapes moving in the clouds, metallic, enormous, alive. Back in the control room of the observation station that had first caught the signal, the same technician sat staring at the screens. He hadn't been able to sleep for weeks. The faint pulse that once flickered like a whisper was now a steady rhythm. He zoomed in on the transmission feed and for the first time, saw an image forming out of the noise. It was blurry and broken, but unmistakable. The outline of a human hand pressed against glass, its fingers leaving trails of light as if reaching through time. The technician froze. His throat went dry. Before he could call his supervisor, the image vanished and all systems went dark. The only thing left was the sound of that same voice repeating endlessly, "System 9A awake. Protocol Armada active." No one in the galaxy could yet see the truth behind that message. Deep beneath the surface of Deathworld 37E, long-forgotten machines were coming to life. Great tunnels carved centuries ago began to hum as power flowed through them once more. Cryogenic vaults hissed open. Inside, the last survivors of Earth, frozen in time, began to stir. The signal wasn't a warning. It wasn't a weapon. It was a call to wake up. Somewhere in the darkness of space, beyond the edge of known maps, a massive ship turned its engines toward the stars. Its hull was scarred, its design ancient, but its systems were alive again. Its onboard AI scanned the data it had received, identified the signal's origin, and sent a single message to every remaining Terran ship still listening. Return to the coordinates. Humanity requires assembly. The message crossed the void in seconds, reaching forgotten fleets, empty stations, and even distant asteroids, where old Terran drones lay in silence. One by one, they began to move. The aliens didn't know it yet, but the Deathworlders were no longer a myth. The signal they had ignored for too long had reached its destination. Humanity was waking up from a long sleep, and the galaxy was about to remember what it meant to hear the footsteps of Deathworlders once more. The message had already crossed half the galaxy before anyone realized what it meant. Return to the coordinates. Humanity requires assembly. Those 6 words traveled through space like an echo from another age. Old machines buried under moons, drifting satellites, and forgotten warships all received it, and one by one, they woke up out in the dark where light barely touched. Ships that had been silent for centuries flickered with life. Their engines came alive with a low, rumbling hum. Dust fell from their metal bodies as if they were shaking off sleep. The galaxy's quiet edges began to move again. No one in the alien territories understood what was happening. Observers called it a cosmic storm at first, a strange energy surge without a source. Dozens of scanners went offline, unable to handle the data. But in the middle of that chaos, one small patrol ship from the Zelvani Dominion detected movement near the border of their territory. At first it looked like debris, broken satellites or fragments of old wreckage. Then the debris changed direction, moving with perfect precision. The patrol ship tried to hail it, sending friendly messages in multiple languages. No answer came. The unidentified vessel turned, paused, and sent back a signal so ancient that even the oldest databases had trouble decoding it. After a few seconds, the translation appeared on the screen. Coordinates verified. Protocol Armada confirmed. Before the crew could react, the mysterious vessel vanished into faster-than-light travel, leaving only static behind. Hours later, every major communications center across 3 sectors received the same message. It was short, clear, and unmistakable. Signal received. We are returning. When those words appeared, everything changed. Panic spread faster than light. Governments called emergency meetings. Military fleets were ordered to high alert. Civilian transports were grounded. No one wanted to believe what the message meant, but deep down they all knew. The Deathworlders were not just alive. They were organized. On some planets, people gathered in streets, staring at the night sky as if waiting to see something arrive. Religious groups began calling it a sign. Others called it the beginning of the end. Old news recordings of humans during their final wars were replayed across channels. Everyone wanted to remember who they were, what they were capable of. In the council chamber of the Dominion, a heated debate raged for hours. Some leaders demanded that they reach out to the humans immediately, to send messages of peace and apology for the wars of the past. Others argued for building defenses before it was too late. No one agreed on what to do. One elder commander stood and said quietly, "If they truly are returning, no defense will stop them. The humans never fought for power, they fought for purpose. If they believe they have one again, we should not get in their way." His words fell heavy in the silence that followed. Meanwhile, the signal's trail was being traced back to the same system, the dead world where everything began. Deathworld 37E. Long thought uninhabitable, it was now showing activity in its orbit. Faint readings of power signatures as if entire facilities were turning back on. Satellites that hadn't moved in centuries began aligning into a network. They weren't transmitting messages, they were listening. Scientists who studied the readings were stunned. The technology was far ahead of anything the galaxy currently had. It was ancient, yes, but perfect. Every system moved in harmony, as if following invisible orders. One researcher described it best. It's like watching a sleeping giant remember how to breathe. Soon after, deep space telescopes captured the first clear image. A massive vessel emerging from hyperspace. Its shape was unlike anything modern engineers could build. It looked more like a mountain of metal than a ship, black and smooth with faint blue light crawling along its surface like veins. Around it, smaller ships moved in formation, each one silent, precise, and completely synchronized. The aliens tried again to communicate. Dozens of diplomatic messages were sent. Offers of peace, cooperation, trade, anything that might calm the storm they felt coming. The human fleet didn't answer. It didn't attack either. It just moved, calmly, patiently, toward the edge of the alien territories. One night, as the fleet passed near a listening post on a small moon, the sensors recorded something strange. A human voice, distorted, deep, and filled with static, spoke a single line. "This sector once belonged to Earth's fallen colonies. We are returning for our people." Those words hit harder than any weapon. The meaning was simple, but the message was clear. The Deathworlders were not coming for conquest, they were coming for their own. Whatever had once belonged to humans, whatever worlds or stations they had lost, they were now reclaiming. The alien fleets pulled back immediately. No one dared to challenge them. Every species that had once shared borders with human space sent emergency signals to one another, begging for unity and calm. Even old enemies worked together, something that hadn't happened in centuries. That's how much fear the humans inspired. Fear mixed with respect, the kind only legends carry. For days, the massive human fleet hovered near the border, unmoving, like silent watchers studying everything. They scanned every planet, every signal tower, every trace of human ruins that remained. They didn't fire. They didn't speak. They only observed. Then something unexpected happened. From one of the smaller alien colonies that had been built over an old Terran settlement, the ground began to shake. Sensors picked up strong energy bursts beneath the surface, ancient reactors coming online. Before the aliens could evacuate, the human fleet moved. Not to attack, but to shield the planet. They formed a massive barrier of ships, absorbing the shockwave from what could have been a deadly explosion. When the danger passed, one of the human ships broadcast a message across all frequencies. The voice was calm, almost gentle. "This world carries the bones of our own. We will not harm you. Leave this place and it will remain untouched." Then the transmission ended. For the first time, the aliens realized something. The humans weren't driven by revenge or greed. They were searching, protecting something ancient, maybe even sacred. Across the galaxy, people began to whisper a new story, that the Deathworlders had not returned to rule but to remember. That they had come not to destroy but to find what was left of their home. Still, not everyone believed. Some species thought it was a trick, a way for humans to rebuild power before striking again. A few small fleets tried to approach the human armada, hoping to test their strength. None of those fleets returned. Not because they were destroyed, but because they simply disappeared. Their ships were found drifting days later, engines intact, weapons untouched, their crews asleep but unharmed. When they woke, they had no memory of what happened, only one faint phrase repeating in their logs: "Do not interfere with the retrieval." By now, even the bravest commanders knew better than to challenge them. The humans had become something different. They were not just survivors anymore, they were guardians of their own past. In the quiet that followed, the human fleet sent out one final message to the galaxy. It appeared on every channel in every language, and even the smallest outpost received it clearly. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of 1,000 years of silence. "We do not seek war. We do not seek power. We seek only what is ours. Stand aside and peace will remain." Then the transmission cut off. In the days that followed, no one dared move. Every eye in the galaxy turned toward Deathworld 37E, waiting for what would happen next. The planet's clouds began to glow faintly blue, forming swirling patterns that stretched for hundreds of kilometers. Underneath, something vast and mechanical was moving, its outline too large to measure. From space, it looked as if the entire world was waking up. The fleet surrounding it began to reposition, aligning into tight formation. It was clear now they weren't preparing to attack. They were protecting the planet like guards watching over a sleeping king. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy saw the humans not as monsters, but as something else entirely. They were part of a legacy too great to erase. A people who had fallen into silence and risen again when their home called them back. And though no one knew what they would do next, everyone understood one thing. The Deathworlders had returned, and the galaxy would never be the same again. Deep beneath the black clouds of Deathworld 37E, the planet began to move. For centuries, storms had covered its surface, hiding the ruins of what once was the heart of human power. Now flashes of light cut through the darkness like veins of lightning, tracing the shapes of old cities buried under rock and ash. What looked like mountains began to shift, revealing the metallic outlines of ships, thousands of them, resting under the planet's crust, perfectly preserved. Inside the largest structure, deep under layers of steel, a single sound echoed for the first time in hundreds of years, the low hum of a reactor waking up. The air shook. Dust fell from the ceilings as ancient corridors lit up one after another. Along those halls, machines shaped like sentinels came to life, their eyes glowing faint blue as they ran system checks. On a high platform, a tall central console flickered to life, displaying human code. Across the screen appeared one line: "Caretaker Unit 09 online. The AI scanned the planet, verified power levels, and connected to the outer network. It detected the signal that had started everything, the same pulse that had reached far beyond the galaxy and woken the fleets. It processed the data, then spoke in a mechanical whisper that echoed through the underground halls. Armada protocol confirmed. Revival sequence initiated. Massive hangar doors opened with a deep rumble, pushing up through the crust like buried giants breaking free. Dust storms rose into the sky as enormous metal chambers released vapor, revealing ships that had not seen daylight in ages. Some were the size of small continents. Their engines burned with pale fire, lighting up the dark clouds above. High above, the human fleet in orbit adjusted its position. Drones flew across the sky, scanning the surface as the planet came alive. Old satellites locked into new orbits, forming a glowing ring that looked like a halo. To the alien observers watching from distant stations, it was both beautiful and terrifying. It looked like the birth of a new star, but they knew better. It was the rebirth of a civilization. On the surface, the old cryovaults hissed open. Inside lay rows of human figures frozen in sleep, covered in frost and light. As the chambers warmed, the ice began to melt, revealing faces still and pale. Heart monitors started to blink. Then slowly, one after another, eyes opened. They woke in silence, confused, breathing heavily as the systems scanned them for signs of life. They didn't remember how long they'd been asleep, only that they had been waiting for the signal. Every one of them had once served in the Terran Defense Armada. They were soldiers, engineers, scientists, explorers, the last generation of humanity's golden age. When the lights came on, they stood, weak but steady. The walls around them projected data, planetary status, fleet readiness, external signals. The moment they saw the words "signal received from outer territories," something inside them stirred. They looked at each other, realizing what it meant. Someone somewhere had called them home. The humans worked quickly despite their exhaustion. They checked equipment, repaired systems, and synchronized with the orbiting ships. Communication lines between the surface and the fleet opened for the first time. Voices filled the channels, soft at first, then stronger as connections stabilized. They sounded calm, focused, like professionals who knew exactly what they were doing. The lead operators reviewed the message that had triggered everything. It wasn't a human signal. It had been sent by an alien science team trying to study the old Terran systems. They had accidentally activated a failsafe left behind from the final days of the human empire. That single mistake had reawakened the entire planetary defense network. The humans didn't blame them. They understood that curiosity was something all intelligent species shared. Still, they knew what must come next. The protocol was clear. Any activation of ancient Terran code meant one thing: potential threat to human legacy. The Armada had to verify it. One of the awakened officers uploaded the command list to the fleet above. The massive ships responded instantly, rearranging their formation into a wide defensive circle around the planet. Thousands of smaller crafts launched from their bays, forming long trails of light that spread across the sky. It looked almost like fireworks, but these were not for celebration. They were part of the awakening. As hours passed, more and more humans woke from cryosleep. They walked out under the open, stormy sky for the first time in centuries. The air was thick and heavy, but they didn't complain. To them, it smelled like home. One group stood on a high ridge overlooking the remains of an old city. Broken towers leaned against the horizon, half buried in sand. A few still glowed faintly with surviving energy. The tallest one had a faint blue light at its peak, the original signal beacon that had called them back. They stood in silence, watching the light flicker through the clouds. No one spoke, but every one of them felt the same thing: a quiet mix of pride and sorrow. Humanity had been forgotten, erased from memory. Yet here they were, standing again on their own soil. In orbit, the command ship continued scanning nearby systems. The alien observers stationed along the border could only watch in awe as the human formation expanded. Every movement was precise, every operation perfectly timed. It was like watching a living machine of discipline and memory. One of the alien officers whispered to his commander, "They're not attacking. They're rebuilding." The commander didn't answer. He just nodded slowly, understanding something far larger was unfolding than anyone had imagined. Days turned into weeks as the humans re-established communication across their networks. Lost colonies began sending responses, small signals from far-off corners of space where human life had quietly endured. Some were hidden among alien populations, some living on half-dead moons. The messages came with disbelief and joy. "We thought we were alone," one voice said. "We thought no one would ever come back." The humans on Deathworld 37E smiled when they heard those words. They sent a single reply. "You were never forgotten. We have returned." Across the galaxy, the effect was immediate. Even those who had never met a human felt something deep inside. Respect, fear, and curiosity all at once. Everyone had heard stories of how humanity had once united against impossible odds. Now those stories were alive again. The alien leaders tried to make contact, but the humans remained quiet. They didn't respond to any diplomatic calls. It wasn't arrogance, it was focus. They were too busy rebuilding. Inside the underground chambers, engineers repaired old AI systems, updated reactors, and restored navigation data from centuries ago. They uncovered records of lost human colonies, unexplored regions, and unfinished projects. The scale of what they had once built was beyond belief. Humanity had not been just another species. It had been a force of creation. When the surface structures finally stabilized, a new signal was transmitted from the planet to the fleet above. This time it wasn't an automated code. It was a voice. "Calm, human, steady. To all surviving Terran ships, the caretakers are awake. Proceed with reclamation phase." The entire Armada adjusted its trajectory. Hundreds of ships left orbit and spread out toward the borders of alien space. Not to conquer, but to investigate, to search for traces of their old settlements. Everywhere they went, they avoided conflict. They scanned ruins, collected data, and moved on like archaeologists of their own history. Still, their silence terrified the galaxy. No one knew their intentions. To most aliens, humans were unpredictable, kind one moment, unstoppable the next. Rumors grew again. Some claimed the Deathworlders were preparing for war. Others believed they were planning to rebuild their empire. But down on the planet, those who had just awakened knew the truth. Humanity wasn't rising for revenge or power. They had returned for something deeper, to make sure their legacy, their story, and their people were not lost forever. At night, when the storms calmed, the humans stood outside their shelters and looked up at the sky filled with their own ships. The glow of the Armada reflected across the clouds, painting the land in silver. For the first time in many lifetimes, they felt peace. Far away, alien sensors continued tracking them, too afraid to interfere. Yet one thing became clear to everyone who watched. The Deathworlders were no longer ghosts of history. They were alive, organized, and purposeful. Their awakening had changed the balance of the galaxy. The signal that started it all had not summoned destruction. It had summoned hope. And somewhere in the endless dark, beyond the reach of even the human Armada, the old beacon that first sent the call flickered one last time before fading into silence. Its mission was complete. Humanity had heard the signal and had come home. The storms of Deathworld 37E had finally begun to thin. For the first time in centuries, sunlight touched the planet's surface. It was dim, scattered through the clouds, but it was real. The people who had awakened from their long sleep stood outside the ancient bunkers and let the light fall on their faces. Many of them had tears in their eyes. The warmth felt strange after so many cold years inside the frozen vaults. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. Everyone knew what this moment meant. Humanity had returned to life. High above the planet, the Armada was in motion. Ships stretched across orbit in perfect patterns, each one moving with slow, deliberate grace. The largest vessels, called Sentinels, had begun to deploy stations around the system to protect their homeworld. Smaller ones darted between them like fireflies carrying supplies, building communication towers and scanning distant signals. It wasn't war they were preparing for, it was restoration. In the main command hall beneath the planet's crust, holographic maps filled the room with faint blue light. Thousands of glowing dots marked every system that once belonged to humankind. Many of them had faded completely. Others still blinked weakly, signs of surviving outposts or fragments of satellites. The caretaker units and newly awakened humans stood before those maps, studying every detail. They had one mission now, to reconnect what had been broken. A few of the younger technicians who had been revived only days earlier couldn't stop staring at the data. Some signals came from places that didn't even exist on newer alien charts. Those lost systems were like ghosts from an ancient time, waiting to be remembered. One of the humans softly said, "These are our forgotten homes." His voice trembled with a mix of awe and sadness. They began rebuilding the communication network first. The fleet's engineers worked around the clock using both old and new technology. Many of the systems were outdated by modern standards, yet they were so well designed that even after centuries they could be repaired. There was something poetic about it, the idea that humanity's creations had outlasted even memory itself. Meanwhile, beyond Deathworld 37E, the rest of the galaxy was restless. Alien governments sent fleets to observe from a distance. No one dared to cross into Terran territory, but their curiosity was growing like wildfire. Across hundreds of worlds, people whispered about the Deathworlders who had woken from the dead. Some said the humans were preparing vengeance. Others believed they were seeking allies. No one knew which rumor to trust. On the human side, the discussions were calm and practical. They didn't want to fight. Their goal was simple: to rebuild, to learn what had happened to the universe in their absence, and to ensure humanity would never vanish again. Yet even without aggression, their strength alone unsettled the galaxy. Every signal they sent, every ship they launched, carried the weight of their history. The Deathworlders didn't need to threaten anyone. Their silence was enough to remind everyone of what they were capable of. The first recon mission left orbit 3 weeks after the awakening. A small fleet of exploration ships was sent toward an old Terran colony world called Lyra 9. The records showed that it had once been a thriving hub of trade, filled with cities and life. Now the data was fragmented. No one knew if anything remained. The volunteers chosen for the mission were quiet as they boarded their ships. They didn't expect to find survivors. They just wanted to bring home whatever was left. The journey took several days. When they finally reached Lyra 9, the sight waiting for them was both haunting and beautiful. The planet was covered in green, forests, jungles, and massive vines that had swallowed the old cities. Nature had reclaimed everything. From orbit, they could see faint outlines of streets and towers hidden beneath the growth. The humans landed carefully, stepping out into a world that felt familiar and strange at once. The air was clean and warm. Birds, descendants of creatures once engineered for ecosystem balance, filled the skies with color. There were no signs of sentient life. The old cities were empty, but they stood firm, built from materials strong enough to last ages. In one central plaza, a statue still stood untouched, a figure holding a torch, the flame still faintly glowing from ancient energy reserves. Beneath it were the words, "We build not for now, but forever." The explorers stood in silence, staring at it. Some smiled. Others wept quietly. They collected archives, power cores, and recovered AI units that had gone dormant long ago. When they left Lyra 9, they didn't take much, but what they brought back was priceless. It wasn't just technology. It was proof that humanity had truly lived there once, had dreamed, created, and left beauty behind. When their ships returned to Deathworld 37E, the fleet greeted them with quiet pride. The artifacts were placed in the Hall of Memory, a large underground chamber where everything recovered from the old empire was kept safe. The place was built like a museum and a cathedral combined. Soft lights glowed on glass panels displaying ancient Terran symbols. The atmosphere there wasn't one of mourning, but of deep respect. More expeditions followed. Each one went farther, searching for fragments of the past. Some found old mining colonies, silent but intact. Others discovered stations still orbiting dead suns, their systems frozen mid-operation. Every discovery felt like uncovering a page of an unfinished book. Yet the humans began noticing something strange. In many of those lost worlds, there were traces of tampering, evidence that someone, sometime in the past, had tried to erase human presence. Monuments were destroyed, data corrupted, even planetary records rewritten. Someone had tried very hard to make sure the galaxy forgot that humanity ever existed. That realization shook everyone. Around strategy tables and data screens, they discussed the possibilities. Who would have done this? Why erase an entire species from history? The older officers remembered stories from before the fall, stories of alliances that broke down, of fear spreading among other species when humanity grew too powerful. Perhaps it was fear that had led to this quiet erasure, one technician said softly. They wanted us gone, even from memory. The words hung in the air like a shadow. Instead of anger, something stronger formed among the humans, a determination to restore what was lost, not through war but through truth. They decided to send transmissions across the galaxy, broadcasting fragments of their recovered history. Old songs, maps, photographs, recordings of laughter, the voice of a child reading poetry, all reminders of what humanity had been. The message was simple: we are here, we remember, and we live again. At first, the galaxy didn't know how to respond. Many alien worlds received the transmissions with awe. Some were moved to tears by the human voices, even though they didn't understand every word. Others grew uneasy, afraid that this rebirth would shift the balance of power. Yet even the most fearful leaders couldn't deny the beauty of those memories. They were too real, too human. Back on Deathworld 37E, the air grew calmer each day. The clouds began to part more often. The people built new settlements using both old designs and new ideas. They grew crops, repaired rivers, and taught the children who had just been awakened. The young ones ran through the corridors laughing, their voices echoing through the halls that had once been silent for centuries. Life had returned. The caretakers observed all this quietly. They had been programmed to serve, to preserve, but now they seemed to feel pride in what they saw. Some of them even began to speak in more human tones, using humor and warmth. They weren't just machines anymore. They were part of this new beginning. Every night, as the twin moons rose, the people gathered outside to watch the stars. They could see the faint lines of their ships moving across the sky. Some nights new constellations appeared, signals from the fleets reporting new discoveries. Each one meant another piece of their story had been found. Yet beneath all the peace there was an unspoken awareness. The humans knew the galaxy was watching closely. They knew old fears might rise again, and they knew that somewhere out there, the ones who had tried to erase them might still exist. Still, none of that stopped them. Humanity had always thrived on challenge. Their strength wasn't in power alone. It was in endurance, in the refusal to vanish quietly. One evening, the leaders gathered in the Hall of Memory. A soft golden light filled the room as holographic stars rotated above them. They watched the map of their territory slowly expand as more systems reconnected. The lead officer said quietly but firmly, "This isn't about claiming worlds. It's about reclaiming who we are." Everyone nodded. No one needed more words than that. Outside, the fleet shimmered like a sea of silver fire against the blackness of space. The same signal that had woken them months ago still pulsed faintly at the heart of the network. It was a heartbeat, a reminder of how it all began. The pulse was steady, rhythmic, alive. And as it traveled through the void, reaching the edges of the galaxy once more, it carried a message clearer than any words. Humanity had returned not to conquer but to endure. The light from the twin moons shimmered over Deathworld 37E, painting the land in shades of silver and quiet blue. The storms that had once ruled this world were now only memories. The wind no longer screamed across the plains, it whispered. The great cities buried beneath ash and stone had begun to rise again. Metal towers shining under the soft light stood where ruins once lay. Life had returned, and with it purpose. Across the planet, humanity worked tirelessly. Fields of green stretched where dust storms had once raged. The air was still heavy but filled with the sound of laughter, tools, and voices calling to one another. The people had learned to live again, not just to survive. They built schools, planted crops, restored energy stations, and repaired long-forgotten technology. Every piece of stone they lifted, every spark of light they rekindled, felt like an act of hope. In orbit above the planet, the fleet shimmered like a constellation of steel. The ships moved in perfect harmony, linked by invisible threads of communication. Each vessel had a purpose. Some guarded the outer edges, some carried supplies to the colonies being rebuilt, and others searched the stars for lost signals of their kind. From space, the sight was breathtaking, the once dead world now surrounded by the glowing promise of human rebirth. Inside the command ship, the leaders gathered for a meeting. The room was simple but filled with quiet strength. A massive projection of the galaxy floated above the center table, filled with tiny points of light, each representing a place where humanity had once lived. Many of them still blinked faintly, meaning they were being reconnected. Others were dark, lost forever. Yet the map was no longer empty. Each day more lights returned. They had rebuilt nearly a third of their old network. Dozens of new colonies had sent signals confirming human life. These people, long hidden among alien worlds, were returning to their origins. Some came in small ships carrying children and stories. Others came as scientists, healers, and explorers who wanted to help restore what was lost. It wasn't just the return of a species. It was the rebuilding of a legacy. One message had reached them recently, a faint signal from the farthest edge of known space. It came from a system thought to be empty, a place called the Halcyon Rim. The message was short, broken by static, but its meaning was clear. We found something. Coordinates attached. Please respond. The signal came from a human frequency, one used before the fall of the Empire. After so many centuries, it was almost a miracle that it still worked. The Council of Commanders decided to send an expedition. The ships chosen were among the oldest, vessels that had once carried the first explorers of humanity's golden age. Their hulls bore scars of countless journeys, yet their engines still hummed with steady power. As the fleet departed, the people of Deathworld 37E watched from the surface. They stood in silence as the ships ascended, leaving trails of light that stretched across the sky like rivers of fire. Children waved, their eyes shining. The old and the young alike felt the same emotion, a deep pride mixed with longing. Those ships carried not just explorers, but the hopes of an entire reborn civilization. The journey to the Halcyon Rim was long and filled with uncertainty. For weeks, the fleet traveled through the dark, guided only by faint coordinates. They passed through regions of space untouched for centuries, where stars burned quietly and planets drifted in silence. The emptiness reminded them of how small humanity once had been, and how far they had come. Finally, the destination appeared, a small planet orbiting a dying sun. The surface was cold and barren, covered in ice and shadow. Yet at its center, something glowed beneath the frost. It was a structure, massive and still active, built in a shape unmistakably human. The explorers landed near it and stepped out into the frozen silence. Their breath turned to mist as they approached the entrance. The doors opened with a slow, heavy sound, revealing a chamber filled with light. Inside were machines unlike any they had ever seen, older than anything on Deathworld 37D, yet far more advanced. At the center stood a pedestal with a small crystal device pulsing softly. When one of the explorers touched it, the room came alive. A holographic figure appeared, formed from light and memory. It spoke with a calm, familiar voice. "If you are hearing this," it said, "then humanity has returned." The explorers froze. The voice continued, explaining that this place was a vault, one of many created in the final days before the Empire's fall. Inside it was knowledge, culture, and history, everything that defined what it meant to be human. The figure spoke of why the Empire had vanished. Fear, not just from enemies, but from within. They had grown too powerful, too widespread, and too divided. The vaults were meant to preserve what truly mattered in case the worst happened. The explorers listened in silence. The message ended with words that sent chills through them. "If we rise again, may we remember that strength is nothing without unity, and survival means nothing without purpose." They returned to the fleet with everything they had recovered: data, records, and blueprints of lost inventions. When they transmitted it back to Deathworld 37E, the entire planet paused. For the first time, they truly understood their ancestors' warning. Humanity had once reached for the stars and lost itself in the process. Now, given a second chance, they couldn't repeat the same mistakes. On the planet, work shifted. The focus moved from weapons and defense to creation and learning. Great academies were built to teach both old wisdom and new ideas. Scientists worked alongside farmers, engineers with artists. The people didn't just want to survive anymore, they wanted to live well, to build a world worth protecting. The alien nations watched all this with growing curiosity. Some approached cautiously, sending messages of peace. A few even sent delegations, unsure if the humans would accept them. To their surprise, the Deathworlders welcomed them kindly. Trade began to flow again. Ideas, art, and technology shared openly. Slowly, the fear that had once surrounded humanity began to fade. Yet the humans never forgot. They still trained, still watched the stars carefully. They had learned that peace could only last when it was protected. Their fleets remained strong, not as conquerors but as guardians of balance. The Armada was now known throughout the galaxy as the keepers of the signal. Years passed. The world grew brighter, its skies clearer. The children born after the awakening never knew the silence of the old days. To them, the planet was not a death world, but a home full of promise. They ran through fields of silver grass, climbed the towers of the new cities, and dreamed of exploring the stars. One evening, a young technician discovered something strange in the network, a faint signal, identical to the one that had started everything long ago. It wasn't coming from Deathworld 37E this time. It was from beyond the galaxy, from a region no one had ever mapped. When the message was decoded, it contained only a few words. "We found the others." The room fell silent. Then slowly smiles spread across their faces. Humanity wasn't just rebuilding itself, it was expanding again. The lost colonies scattered across unknown galaxies were still out there waiting to be found. The command sent out a new order to the fleets, exploration missions to follow the new signal. The largest ships prepared for departure. The people gathered once again to watch the skies as the engines ignited. The same excitement that had filled the air during the first awakening returned. This time, though, there was no fear, only hope. As the Armada rose, the clouds glowed with their light. The people watched until the ships became stars in the distance. Some whispered prayers, others simply stood in awe. Above them, the night sky seemed endless, filled with promise. The last message from the fleet echoed across all human channels. The signal brought us back once. Now it leads us forward. Back on Deathworld 37E, the caretakers kept watch over the cities. The fields rustled softly in the wind. Children laughed in the streets. The once dead world was now alive with color and sound. The old beacon at the heart of the planet still pulsed faintly, a quiet heartbeat of light that would never fade. Far away, beyond the reach of any telescope, a new light appeared in the void. It was faint but steady, like a distant sunrise. The galaxy was changing again, not through war or fear, but through rebirth. The Deathworlders had come from the ashes of silence, called by a single signal. Now they carried that signal with them, not as a warning, but as a promise. Wherever they went, it reminded them of who they were: dreamers, survivors, builders of worlds. The story of the signal would live on, told across generations, not as the tale of an armada of vengeance, but as the beginning of humanity's second dawn. The Deathworlders had been summoned once to remember their past. Now they followed the signal to shape their future, and so, under the quiet glow of two moons, the world that was once feared as a graveyard of warriors became something greater, a cradle of life, strength and endless hope. Humanity was home again, and this time they would never be forgotten.